Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Welcome to Industry Day at the Congress and this session, which is when industry meets agencies. Before I say anything else, we will have a short period at the end of the plenary for questions and answers from the audience. For those of you who were here yesterday, it is the same procedure as in the Heads of Agency session, and it is outlined for you on the screen. If you would be kind enough to attract the attention of one of the co-moderators who will be in the audience, who are now holding up their hands, they will provide you with a form on which you can write your question. They will then be sent up to the platform, and we will attempt to answer as many as we can in the time available. So this event is organised by the IAF Industry Committee and is given over to discussion of a number of important questions by the heads of agencies and heads of industry. We have a distinguished panel here, and I will introduce them in a moment. They're going to be discussing questions which have been put by members of the panel from the Industry Committee and from myself. For any of you that don't know me, I'm Richard Brooke. I'm co-chairman of the Congress Programme Committee. And our panellists today are Dr. Michael Griffin, Administrator, NASA, Mr. Jean-Jacques Dourdin, Director General, ESA, Mr. Alexander Medvedchikov, Deputy Head, Roscosmos, Mr. Jean-Yves Le Gall, President and CEO of Arianespace, Mr. Shoichiro Asada, General Manager of Space Systems Department, MHI, Mr. Alexander Derekin, Deputy Chief Designer, Energia, Gwyn Shotwell from SpaceX, who is standing in for Elon Musk, who had a launch last night, so he had to be at that, and we're very pleased to welcome Gwyn here, and Dr. Mike Healy, who is Director of Earth Observation, Navigation and Science at Astrium Limited. I'm sure you'll agree that is a particularly well-qualified panel to address the issues we have at hand. Now, the subject area that has been chosen is the space exploration program. This is inspiring, but it's expensive. So we're going to discuss 5 questions, which you will now see on the screen. And the first of these is how we justify the budgets. How can we afford the costs of space exploration? Who should take the risks? Who should contribute to covering the costs? What is expected of industrial participants? Maybe I could ask Mike Griffin if he would comment first of all on affording the costs of exploration. Mike.
Well, thank you. If I thought I knew how we could make the arguments that we could afford the cost of exploration, if I thought I knew how to make those arguments effectively, I might be doing better than we're doing. But I have tried in my country during my tenure to make the point that for the advanced nations of the world, space is a strategic good. And I follow up on that by asking the question, when I say strategic, do you know what I mean? And often people do not. And I define it then as something which touches your life at a multitude of points. And then I'm able to point out that in the modern world, everywhere you look, for the larger nations, starting with national security, for the smaller nations or less well-developed nations, Earth applications, but everywhere you look, space touches your life. You may not know it because the connection is often once or twice removed. I once was briefing a member of our own Congress and was asked the question, why do we need these weather satellites anymore? All I have to do is turn on the Weather Channel. So it was necessary to make the connection between the Weather Channel and weather satellites, and so on. Space, I think, and space exploration is particularly strategic because, summed up, It is the hardest thing we know how to do at all. We barely know how to do it. When human beings send things into space, and even with even greater difficulty, send themselves, taken together, no single part of it is maybe the most difficult, but taken together, it is the most difficult thing that human beings do. And as such, the doing of it drives the very frontier of technology. And every time we look at it, that brings benefits home right here on Earth. When people talk about spending the money in space, I remind them that they're not spending it in space, they're spending it here on the ground, advancing the very forefront of what it is that humans know how to do, and that it brings along an entire society behind it. Those are the sorts of arguments I use to justify our budgets. I also don't think that we should ever expect budgets for advanced space activities to be anything more than a fraction of a % of the overall budget. These are discretionary activities from the store of wealth that the advanced nations have available. They are the seed corn of investment for the future. They are down payments on options for our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren, and as such, they must be small and they are discretionary. But because they must be small and must be discretionary does not mean they should be omitted entirely. Those are the arguments that I try to use. We will see if they have any long-term effect.
Thank you. Jean-Jacques, is the European perspective different?
Not at all. I don't see why the perspective in Europe would be different from the one in the United States. I fully share what Mike was saying. I think that we cannot justify the investments in exploration on short-term return. I am sure that there will be a return. I don't think that, speaking of Europe, that Christopher Columbus crossed the Atlantic Ocean on a business case basis. I have not read any books telling me that he had to demonstrate the return that he would get by crossing the Atlantic Ocean. And at the end, there was a lot of return, especially a lot of return for Europe. And so this is exactly the same type of discussion. I think that exploration is much beyond science, much beyond economy. We are just speaking of our future. So I think that we are just investing in our future. And this is on that basis that we have a chance to finance exploration.
So we must expect the spending on exploration to be related to the global gross domestic product in some way and plan on that basis, I think is what you're saying, unless we have a Christopher Columbus who comes along or some privateers who decide to do it on their own resources. Mr. Medvedchikov, is the situation in Russia different?
Ну, на моей памяти очень многие большие люди пытались полностью коммерциализировать космическую деятельность.
In my memory, I met a lot of different prominent people who tried to commercialize the whole set of space activities.
И, безусловно, очень многие направления, они вполне имеют право быть коммерциализированы, что и делается.
And I understand that quite a number of different areas of space activities can be commercialized, and it is done successfully.
Но есть целый ряд направлений, которые, если и будут когда-то коммерциализированы, то, я думаю, у нас с вами уже не будет в это время.
But still there exist a whole number of different space programs and projects, and I think that even they can be commercialized. That will be done in years, and I don't think that any one of those assisting this session will be witnessing this thing.
Это как раз в том числе и то направление, о котором говорил господин Гриффин, господин Дарден. Это вложение государств, вложение всех нас в будущее.
And space exploration belongs to this set of programs, and I share the opinion of Mike Griffin and Jean-Jacques Dordain, who said these are public investments for a very long term.
И Россия в этом плане, естественно, ничем не отличается.
And so Russia is no exception. We have the same point of view.
Thank you. Let's turn to the industry perspective maybe, and I'm going to ask Mr. Legal if he would comment on how we afford, how we take risks. Is it part of industry's remit here to help the development along, and how much risk should industry take in helping achieve the objectives of exploration?
In fact, I think that this is not so easy for space industry to take risks, and this is why this kind of companies as Arianespace have been invented almost 30 years ago. And I think that what we are doing in the field of launch services is a kind of example of what can be done for risky projects as exploration, because we are exploiting launch systems which are developed by the European Space Agency, and we have a very strong relationship with the European Space Agency. But we make a kind of mix where the agency develops very risky projects and where the industry takes a part of the risk for the exploitation of these projects. And obviously it works. I think that you know our track record, but what reinforces my opinion that it works is that a number of other companies worldwide try to duplicate this model of partnership between the agencies and the industry.
Thank you. I'm going to come along here to Mike Healy now, maybe, and ask Mike from Astrium what your perspective is on industry's involvement here, and again, the taking of risk and how you get the return.
Yeah, from an industry perspective, I guess we invest in a couple of different ways in programs. We invest in terms of research and development funding. And why do we do that? Well, we see a perspective of a long-term contract, and by investing in the critical phases of the technology, we believe we'll get an advantage over our competitors. We'll develop the technology that will make a program low enough risk for us to take a full contract. So I think from our point of view, therefore, in terms of that investment, what you need to see is the long-term perspective and some continuity of funding. I think if you get that, then you allow industry to position itself appropriately and reinforce the activities of the public sector, and therefore get a reasonable return on investment. There are more risky ventures, I guess, which we've got involved in, and the move, at least in the UK, towards these public-private partnership type arrangements. Again, this has come from the public sector's view. It's not really prevalent in the space agency perspective just yet, but the view that by procuring a service, you stimulate the private sector in the right way to perform correctly. And the investment from the private sector is much more obvious then, because you basically pre-finance the program. You're putting in large sums of funding, and obviously the experience Astrium has with this one is through our Skynet contract and setting up Paradigm, and that's been a very positive experience for, in this case, the MOD in the UK, and with Astrium, because the program was set up in the correct way, so that the risks weren't shared, they were apportioned, they were allocated between the different parties, and the cost and revenue side was in some way even, or balanced in some way. Now, to move to that sort of model in space exploration, I think we're quite a long way off that. But again, industry, I think, is open to either sort of investment, and the public sector needs to decide how it can get its best value for money, and different models may work in different ways.
So maybe by looking to reuse technologies which have been developed for the more commercial applications where appropriate, so that you spread your risk and reduce the risk in the exploration by reusing as much technology as possible. Is that part of the philosophy that you would have in looking at how you prioritize your technology development?
Yes, I think the more, well, from an industry point of view, if you can use a recurring product to do something, it's usually lower cost and lower risk, and the customer is happier because we're not late with our delivery and we're doing it to budget. But then again, there's a lot of things that we do in exploration which can't be done with recurring products. You know, if you take no risk, you don't normally push the boundaries so far. And I think it's getting this balance. And obviously, the earlier you can make investments together in order to retire the critical risks, the better the program is in the longer term. And for different programs, you would take a different risk profile. If you're going off to I don't know, Jupiter, it's a little bit different from sticking a geostationary satellite around Earth. So,
thank you. Gwyn, from the SpaceX perspective, sort of very entrepreneurial kind of involvement in getting into space, how do you see organizations and companies like yours becoming involved in exploration? Do you see that happening eventually so that we have privateer, if I can put it that way, ventures out into the exploration domain?
Yeah, there's no question about it. As a matter of fact, people probably know our company by the name of SpaceX, but it's actually Space Exploration Technologies. We were founded to facilitate space exploration because of the vision of our CEO. We're able, I think our COTS partnership with NASA is a great example of industry partnering with the government to facilitate, I'm going to put in quotes, an easier element of exploration, and for us it was a way for us to contribute was in launch. So we can spread the risk of launching a capsule like Dragon, which is our exploration, or our response to exploration. We can spread the risk of the development of Falcon 9 over both commercial launches, government launches, as well as the exploration market.
Do you see yourself going beyond launch in due course?
I'm sorry?
Do you see yourself going beyond launch, the launch phase? What else will you do after you have got the launching sorted out?
There's two pieces. Well, luckily, actually, my talk here today and yesterday became dramatically easier after the success of the launch. But SpaceX, in developing the Dragon capsule, also ends up being a host platform for other instruments, very much like the Virgin presentation prior to this particular panel. You'll also see SpaceX work in areas where there looks to be a pretty large market that we can exploit. We're not necessarily interested in doing one-of-a-kind type activities. We really want to spread the investment over a much larger market.
Okay, thank you. We've heard partnership mentioned very frequently, both yesterday and indeed in the first 10 minutes of our discussion here. So I want to turn to the second of the questions, which has to do with how you create lasting partnerships between agencies, nations, industry. So, should nations seek international partners for their national initiatives, or should nations contribute to an international enterprise? What's it going to take to get back to the moon and Mars? How do we set these partnerships up? How can industry be involved? I'm going to ask Jean-Jacques Dordain if he would comment on what he thinks is the best way to approach establishing partnerships.
Well, I shall certainly base my comments on the experience of the European Space Agency, because speaking of partnership, this is a partnership between 18 countries of Europe, and at least this is successful. So we have some experience. We have even more than 30 years of experience of partnerships among European countries, and I must say that there is, taking our experience and related to your questions, we have some ESA programs which are coming from national initiatives, and we have other ESA programs which are more contribution of countries to a European program. So we have the two models, and I must say the two models are successful. It depends. Anyway, when you are a space agency, and this is something which is what I would like to underline, You never get public money for free. There is always constraints associated to public money. I have never seen a government putting money on something without any constraints. So we have to work with that. And for example, in the partnership, be it within ESA or be it, for example, the partnership that we have with NASA, one of the constraints is no exchange of funds. It's what we call return inside ESA, but this is basically non-exchange of funds. Mike Griffin is not able to transfer money from United States to Europe, as well as sometimes we are doing that, but I have to demonstrate why I am flowing money outside the borders of my member states. So there are always constraints. And these constraints, you have to work with these constraints. You have no choice but to do that. But I think that the two key elements of the success of ESA, it's number one, flexibility in the building up of partnership. This should not be a supranational authority imposing something to different partners. You never impose something to partners. I cannot impose something to any of my member states. Anyway, they have the money. When we are around the table of the council, I am the only one around the table having no money. So I have to, I cannot impose anything to the member states. But what I can do is to convince them to work together and to put their money in an ESA program. But we must be flexible, number one. And the second rule, which is very important, is the management. There must be an architect of the partnership, because if not, this is pure anarchy and you have no chance to have success. So you must have an architect. And the architect can be one of the partners, and we have that in ESA. CNES has been the architect of Ariane development within an ESA program. But we have also ESA program where the architect is ESA itself. Again, the architect can be chosen one of the partner or an organization embracing all the partners. We have also this type of example. But the key point is to have an architect. If you don't have an architect, if you don't have a boss, I think that your partnership has very little chance to succeed.
I think we see very well why you are Director General. The leadership is important, as is persuasion. So it's all about partnership, I think, is all about persuading people to go in the same direction with a common agenda and common objectives. Mr. Medvedchikov, would you like to comment on your approach to getting involved in partnerships from the Russian perspective?
Ну, лично я сторонник сотрудничества, но здесь, наверное, не очень важна моя личная точка зрения.
So personally, I'm a big partisan of cooperation, but here I think that my personal view is not that important.
Поэтому просто несколько фактов. Наше сотрудничество, например, с Францией длится уже более 40 лет.
Just a few facts. For instance, Russia has been cooperating with France for more than 40 years.
Даже в самые такие холодные годы был совместный полет «Союз-Аполло», когда вместе летали советские и американские астронавты.
And the example of Russia-US cooperation is the Soyuz-Apollo program, which was implemented in the coldest era of our relations.
Сегодня у нас несколько десятков межправительственных соглашений с разными странами по сотрудничеству в области космоса.
Today, Russia has dozens of cooperation agreements with different countries.
И этот аспект сотрудничества имеет несколько важных моментов. Это и политический момент, это и финансовый момент, это и научно-технологический момент. То есть целый комплекс вопросов, когда, объединившись, можно все это сделать быстрее, качественнее, надежнее и дешевле.
And there are many different important aspects of cooperation. First political, then financial, then scientific and technological. And I think that complicated, sophisticated programs can be realized on the basis of unifying resources of different kinds.
Я уверен, чем больше мы имеем кооперацию, больше сотрудничества, тем ближе мы узнаем друг другу, и тем проще решать любые вопросы, даже не связанные с космосом, между нашими странами.
And an important thing that the closer we cooperate, the better we know each other, and that helps a lot not only to implement specific space projects, but to contribute to better understanding between nations and to contribute to resolution of problems of general character.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me turn to Mr. Asada, and perhaps you could give us your perspective on which kind of partnerships work best for you in Japan.
At first, generally, to progress the space activities, space exploration, I believe international collaboration is indispensable to achieve it. On the other hand, from our experience to attend the ISS, space development activity is a nation flagship. Therefore, we'd like to take a distinguished role in the international collaborative project. My means is Japan has a special feature, take a featured role to the collaborative works. In private activities, we have already a good relationship with Jean-Yves Le Gal's Ariane Space. Mitsubishi Heavy Industry provide launch services by H2A launch vehicles. We are agreed with Ariane Space to provide benefit service to the customer to keep the launch date where 82 Ariane 5 has some accident before the launch, we can back up each other. Okay. This is a good example.
Thank you. Mike Healy, from Astrium's point of view, I guess you participate in a lot of projects which are organized, or missions which are organized in different ways. From an industry perspective, a large contractor, which work best for you? How would you ideally like to see partnerships set up?
I don't know whether there's an ideal way of doing this. There are some principles which you need to adopt, I think. I mean, the fundamental reason why we partner with anyone, and we do that on every single program. There's not one program that we do just as Astrium. So the reason why we partner is pretty straightforward. We think that we have a better chance of achieving success, winning contracts and delivering those contracts by that partnership. Consequently, it's quite often, again, driven by the customer. So if you're in an institutional program, you know the rules that you engage with, whether there's a geographic distribution rule or whatever. We try to match our team to the needs of the customer. It could be a national export contract where we team with local, national companies. It could be a commercial contract where we have capabilities that are very complementary and we decide to work together with someone. But always it's driven from the perspective of the customer needs something and we have a better chance of delivering that or winning that contract by working together. And I think that the critical thing is to work together. So whatever arrangement we have, whatever teaming arrangement we have with any other aspect of industry, the closer we can work, the more we can understand the mutual problems that we face and the challenges that we have, the better the chance of us being successful. So, I think we're quite pragmatic in terms of how we work. It's driven by the customer needs. There are certain principles we work to, whatever the program is, and we just try to be pragmatic from that point of view.
And understanding the constraints that Jean-Jacques talked about early on, which which clearly determine how these partnerships are set up and how they
progress.
progress.
I think understanding the constraints from the customer side is absolutely fundamental to understanding how to meet that need. And it can be, as I say, it can be geographic distribution, it can be, again, even on these international cooperations where NASA and ESA are working together, there's a number of examples of that which we are part of. Usually within that, the ESA contribution and the NASA contributions are quite clear. So consequently, it's sort of an institutional program from our perspective, and we work according to that. But it's certainly possible, if the rules changed, that we could work on institutional programs and work with US companies. I mean, we do it on commercial programs. So, and that's just one example. Obviously, there's cooperations with Japan and China and Russia, etc., which the same would apply.
Okay, thank you. Let's turn to the third question, which is about priorities. And yesterday we heard, I think, that it's not the moon or Mars that we're going to, it is both the moon and Mars. So I guess the question is, do we use the moon as a stepping stone to get to Mars, or do we go to one after the other, or in parallel? Should they be manned missions, unmanned missions? Which are the technologies which are a priority to develop that we don't yet have? Perhaps I could ask Mr. Medvedchikov to lead on the answer to this question, please.
Ну, это вопросы, наверное, не совсем однозначные, на них можно ответить.
I don't think I'm in a position to give accurate and exact answers to all these questions today.
Как мне представляется, противопоставлять здесь нельзя, что там быстрее, что вперед, Луна или Марс. Что касается автоматических космических аппаратов, я думаю, все это можно делать параллельно, в зависимости от того интереса, который есть сегодня.
So when we talk about going back to the moon or going to Mars via moon or just going directly to Mars, I think that all possible answers have the right to exist. And if we talk about robotic exploration, I think all three are possible and they can be done in parallel.
И сегодня это, в общем-то, так и происходит. И на Луну летают космические аппараты, и на Марс летают.
And we can see it's happening today because unmanned missions are sent over to Mars and to the Moon, and they work successfully.
Что касается пилотируемых полетов, ну, вроде бы представляется логичным все-таки сначала слетать людям на Луну.
And if we talk about manned flights, I think it could be, and it seems logical to get back to the moon first.
И хотя многие вещи для полета на Луну и на Марс могут быть использованы и там, и здесь, но тем не менее целый ряд технологий, они все-таки отличаются.
And though we can use the same technologies to send a manned mission to the moon and to Mars, I think technically these manned missions are quite different, and different technologies should be used.
Ну, начиная даже с системы жизнеобеспечения, если Луна достаточно близкий к нам объект, то до Марса лететь, в общем-то, относительно долго.
Let's take an example, life support system. And in comparison, Moon is very close to us, and Mars is far away.
Это дополнительные вопросы, дополнительные технологии, дополнительные средства, поэтому, опять же, вроде бы логично многие вещи проверить, слетав на Луну.
And though these are different technologies, I think and different resources and different programs, it seems logical to test some of them at least by flying to the moon.
Но мне кажется, опять же, в вопросах приоритета, куда раньше, куда позже, очень важна цель и задача.
And by setting, when we set priorities, where do we go first and what for, I think the key point is the objective of this mission. And by setting exact objectives and clear objectives, we can take a decision on where to go first.
Поскольку вы в первом вопросе как раз и звучало, а будет ли какой-то возврат средств?
We already discussed during the first set of questions, will there be any return from that? That's why the objectives are very important.
Поэтому, полетев на Луну человеком, надо ясно представлять, что мы хотим, какие задачи. То ли чисто презентационные, политические, то ли какие-то научные, то ли мы смотрим глубоко вперед и, может быть, какие-то технологические задачи ставим перед собой. Ну, точно так же и с Марсом.
By designing a human mission to the moon, we must think about what kind of goals we have. And there are many possibilities. First, and I cannot preclude thinking about that, cannot avoid thinking about that, to cover purely political goals, or maybe just scientific goals, or if we look deeper into the subject, we may try to solve some long-standing technological goals. Okay.
Ну, наверное, можно говорить долго. Спасибо.
I think I'll finish here. There's a topic to discuss for hours.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Mr. Derekin, could you give us your perspective on priorities here?
I would try to be a little bit more specific. If we are talking about exploration, just about exploration, we should not repeat Apollo program. We should have some new exploration task on the moon surface. But if you talk about Mars, it's much more interesting than repeating of the Apollo. But Mars is too difficult, too costly for all participants. Therefore, we have two goals, two objectives for architecture of the program. The first, we need to define beyond exploration or deep explorations goals on the moon. And the second, we need to define technologies which might be used for Mars program to be earned from the moon program. It is not so easy questions, and all of us repeating Mars plus moon, moon plus Mars. But technologies might be different. Therefore, the key point is technologies to be used for moon should be used for Mars. And I would to remind, we need to do something, I agree with Mr. Griffin, we need to do something with ISS. We should not forget ISS. ISS is our most, I believe, effective program, international cooperation program. We should continue ISS as much as we can, or we need to define what should be next step on the low orbit. It's difficult to imagine we should go to Moon, Mars, and beyond, and not to expand our presence on the low orbit. We have a lot of capabilities, and I should congratulate Virgin Galactic, etc., to expand low orbit for mankind, for all strategic and non-strategic too. Therefore, we should combine three things and decide what is the first priority to us.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Legal, would you like to comment, please?
On the priorities, I don't have an advice, and I think that this is to the agencies to answer. But I think that whatever the destination, we must share the risk and we must work on risk mitigation. And in my opinion, besides the specific systems which are developed as the projects of NASA to go to the moon and beyond, we need to have systems allowing that access to space will not be a central issue for implementing exploration mission. And from this point of view, I think that some systems for the exploration should be built on proven solutions as it is already existing, and with an availability which is ensured on the long run with well-established providers. I think that this is quite important because, in my opinion, access to space is not the real destination, the real objective of exploration. The real objective of exploration is to go to the moon, to go to Mars, and we do not need to have a problem in launching these missions, and this is why I think that we must work on risk mitigation using already existing launch systems.
Okay, thank you. Mike Griffin and Jean-Jacques, do you have anything to add that you would like to add to that discussion about priorities?
I think I might. I've been fairly clear about my view of these things, and I will state it again. The issue of priorities as to what is important in terms of the balance of effort on the moon, say the near-Earth asteroids or Mars, depends on knowledge not yet available. The total human experience on the moon is less than 27 working days. Less than 27 human working days on the moon. On a world that is the size of Africa. I believe, I can't prove it, but I believe that our descendants will think we were idiots if, on the basis of 27 days of experience, we decide that the moon either is the most valuable thing in creation or that it is without value. We don't know enough to determine that one way or the other, and the only way that we will find out is to go there. So whether or not the moon is a stepping stone to Mars or a place of interest in its own right depends on knowledge not yet in evidence. Mars is, I think, fantastically interesting, or likely to prove so, although I cannot yet prove it. But I believe that Mars may turn out to be a tremendously interesting place for human beings in the future. As I said earlier, our task is to purchase options for those descendants. If we choose to purchase those options, then the question is how to do it. If we had no moon, we would find a way to get to Mars without it. But by the time we go to Mars, there will be an enormous amount yet to be learned. For example, unless we can do the following experiment successfully, we would be foolish to go to Mars. That experiment would consist of putting a crew of human beings on the space station for, say, 7 or 8 months, then taking them from the space station and landing them on the moon and asking them to survive on the moon with no further assistance other than what they have brought for another 9 months to a year, then return them to the surface of the Earth, or to return them to the space station and let them stay there for another 6 or 7 months, and then bring them back to the surface of the Earth, all without any assistance other than what we initially send with them, because that is the way it will be when we go to Mars. Until we are able to perform that experiment successfully, whether we actually perform it or not, but unless we believe that we can perform that experiment successfully, the first crew to go to Mars will not come back.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Jean-Jacques?
Well, I think that I fully agree with what Mike said, and I said that already yesterday. I think that it's not Mars or Moon, it's both Moon and Mars, and I think that the two places are certainly interesting. At least they have a potential to be interesting, because I fully agree that we don't know a lot about both the Moon and Mars, and so Moon and Mars are two very important objectives. And now, for what concerns human or robots, I think that we need a lot of robotic missions before putting a crew up there, be it the Moon or Mars, because as I said last night, the key problem is transportation. If we have to transport each kilo that the crew would need on the surface of the Moon, or even worse, on the surface of Mars, if any kilo must be taken out of the earth, I must say that it will be a fortune for Ariane Espace, but I am not so sure that this is the best way to make an exploration program, meaning that we have to learn on how to use the resources in situ. And for doing that, I must say that we need to know much more about the Moon and about Mars, and to know how to use the resources in situ. And this is the reason why robotic missions are so important, not to replace the human missions, but just to make sure that the human missions will be successful.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Mike Keeley, let's turn to how we get a return on this investment. I think it is when public money is being invested in any enterprise, be it science or whatever, increasingly we are looking to get returns to the economy from exploitation of technology, the knowledge that we get. How do you see us trying to maximize that return? Does it mean, for example, that companies should work not only in space but in other industries so they can transfer knowledge and technology? What are your thoughts?
I think we touched on the investment side of things and some of the return on investment in the first question on justifying budgets. I personally don't believe there is a great justification investing in space when we talk about, to use the UK government term, spin-in and spin-out technologies. They may happen, but I think they're a bit of an exception, and they certainly don't justify the funding. But I think the real difficulty with this question is not so much the investment side of things. The investment side of things is very clear, all too clear in some instances. So you have a large financial outlay to do something, and what you get back from that, the importance of that really varies from one person to another, or from one government to another. So if I'm talking and trying to make a case for a return on investment to the UK government, it's quite different, I guess, to talking to the French government. We've just spent the last year, as many members of the audience will realise, making this case for space in the UK. And it's really, the objective is to try to increase the government ambition in funding space, to increase the amount of money it puts in through the next ministerial conference and beyond. And it's very much directed towards the UK Treasury and trying to demonstrate financial return. And that's rather difficult to do in an exploration programme. I mean, it's not so easy to say the financial return you get out of it. You don't get financial return, you get scientific return. But more than as much as anything else, and it goes back to the very start of this discussion that Mike Griffin was saying, that there's other elements. There's the curiosity element, there's the inspirational element. The reasons why you invest in space, particularly for exploration, are not just financial. And yet, when you're making the case in the UK, you have to make a very strong financial case, otherwise you haven't got a chance. So you talk about high technology jobs, and you talk about R&D funding and leveraging that, and returns on investment, and what the operators can make, etc. That's not what you would do in France. You would have a much more of a technology field of things and a strategic field. So when it comes to return on investment, I have a little bit of a trouble really saying much more than that, because it just depends who you're talking to. And it's not the investment side, it's the return side, which is the difficult bit.
Yes, and that means you've got to address your argument to really rifle shot it to the particular target that you're trying to influence. Yes. Mr. Derekin, would you like to comment, please?
If we are talking about investment return, we should return to the sharing of risks between government and industry. This is maybe very attractive point for Rosenergy. We in Russia, and we had difficult time in our past, and we have experienced how we can do it. As an example, when we created Sea Launch program together with Boeing, with Norwegian and Ukrainian partners, to make appropriate investment, we developed special mechanism for risk mitigation together with the World Bank, and World Bank provide political risk guarantee, which been counter-guaranteed by the Russian government. Therefore, first is government should take a risk for non-commercial issues. I'm especially emphasized for two areas of risk to be taken by the government. First, government should have stable program with stable budgeting. It's dreams probably, but it's absolutely necessary. And second, government should take a risk for the factors which is not under our control, like currency exchange, etc., like political issues. And it will dramatically stimulate industry activities. If we have stable program, if we have some understanding about opportunities to mitigate our risks, we can pick up a lot of money and we can create a lot of advanced technologies and put to the government needs to. We have this experience, we can duplicate this experience, but it's so important for us to have, can I say, government-industry partnership within this area. I would probably tell about next generation spacecraft opportunities. Mr. Griffin, busy with Orion. Maybe Mr. Darden, together with us, or with Japan, can create new generations of the vehicle. Virgin Galactic and several companies trying to provide commercial launches. But governments needs for today just 6 crew members on board ISS. It's probably just single or 2 launches per year. It's absolutely no commercial, no industry. It's just relations between customer and supplier. If we have to have new technology, can I say Virgin Galactic technology or energy technology in place, we need to have dozens of launches, hundreds of participants per year. It's absolutely new area of activities. And industry cannot develop, cannot impose this. We can just implement this if we have government order. Therefore, the first issue and first priority is we need to understand our program as much as we can. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Asada, would you comment, please?
Yes. Mitsubishi Heavy Industries does not carry on the space business not only for getting profit. Mitsubishi Heavy Industries takes a main role of space activity in Japan, indeed. However, our total sales, sales from space activity is only 1% of total sales of our company. Benefit for our activities in space development is to get know-how to integrate big-scale systems and also to show our technology to our customers. That is, space business is our showcase to the customer. MHI is a company to provide wide variety of infrastructure from deep sea to space to the all over the world. While people or government expect to develop space, MHI should answer their expect, even if it is risky and low profitability, according to our company's management concept. We shall contribute the human by our technology.
Thank you very much. Let's turn in the last few minutes maybe to private enterprise. And Gwyn, I'm going to ask you how you see enterprises such as Virgin, SpaceX, growing in the future. And as more commercial offerings more frequently become available, how will this affect, do you think, the relationship with the space agencies? What will become the province of private industry to lead, and what will be the province of the agencies to lead?
Hello? There we go. I think that private industry has a strong role in repetitive, recurring type operations. What will, again, put in quotation marks, is the easy things, where there is a possibility for a great return, and the company itself can take on significant risks. I think the space agencies really need to take on the very difficult things, where return is not necessarily expected, not return in a financial sense, maybe return only in an intellectual sense or an economic stimulation sense. We hope at SpaceX, certainly, that our low-priced vehicles prove to be reliable. Actually, they will prove to be reliable, and that will free up financial elements within the agencies to spend more money on the hard things, which is where I think they should be spending.
Mr. Legal, how do you see the relationship between Ariane and, for example, some of the new launch capabilities that are being talked about, or indeed more than talked about, implemented?
But first of all, I am not sure that are existing real private enterprise, because either you have a private enterprise, but in the background, behind the curtain, there is a strong government program, and even if it doesn't have a direct relationship with the private enterprise, but it is existing, and this is the case for many launch vehicles in the world, or you can have a private enterprise, but having big contracts coming from government. And in any case, the links are very strong between private enterprise and governments. And on the low cost, I would like to quote some of our customers who tell us that, in fact, very often low cost is much more expensive than classical solution, because when you have to pay for failures, when you have to pay for delays, when you have a $500 million satellite which is grounded waiting for, during 18 months, a launch vehicle, at the end of the day, it costs a lot. So I think that if we have industry today, and commercial industry, both in Europe, in the US, in Japan, with the prices which are as they are, I do not know a lot of space industry which are very, very profitable. Most of them are just break-even, and this is not a fact. This is because it's a very, very tough business. And at the end of the day, most of our customers, they do prefer to pay what we propose to them, to have reliable launches performed right on time, rather than waiting for failures.
And I guess my question here at the end, do you see space tourism as changing the equation here? That's to all of you, I guess, whoever wants to...
Space tourism is quite interesting, but once again, you cannot compare a project for space tourism, sending a few people, making a small jump outside the atmosphere and coming back, and putting in geostationary orbit, or sending to the moon or to Mars very heavy payloads. And there is a difference. Of course, in any case, this is space. And for instance, I have I am very impressed by what has been performed by SpaceX during the last launches, and in particular during the last launch of last night. And this morning, one journalist told me, but now you have a real competitor. Of course, we have a newcomer in the field of launch vehicles, but I just want to remind that the Falcon 1 at liftoff is 38 tons, Ariane 5 at liftoff is 800 tons, 20 times bigger. And so you cannot compare this kind of launchers. SpaceX is a real success, but it is not a heavy lift launcher. And I would like also to see that at the level of cost, I understand that SpaceX now is marketing its launches at $10 million. With Ariane 5, we are at 200 million. We are 20 times heavier, and everybody knows that in this business, costs are not linear. So I think that we are much cheaper than SpaceX.
Thank you. I think that's an interesting note to end this, this set of questions on, if I may. We have another 10 minutes, and I'm going to select a couple of questions from the audience, if I may. And I doubt that we'll have time to ask all of them, but let's ask a couple anyway. And this one is from Julian, an ISU student, and it's for Jean-Jacques. I will paraphrase, which is that given our UK Prime Minister's strong statement about space yesterday, and indeed the increasing strategic importance of space in Europe, why are we not investing as much per head as the United States, and do we actually see ourselves doing this in the future?
I think it's good news to have the strong support of the UK Prime Minister. Now there is still a distance between a strong political support and size of investments. As you know, we are far from spending the same amount of money as in the United States, again, for public investments. This is just a fact. We are working with the public investments that we are given in Europe. Obviously, I would like to get more support, and I hope that we shall get more support from UK, and including in the short term at the Council at ministerial level, and we have good prospect for that. Now, I would not like to give the impression that, because I take the remark which has been made, that the UK government is looking at carefully at the return of its investment, while the French were supposed not to take care of their return on investment. I must say that I have not this type of impression. I can tell you that I have the impression that I have to justify in all member states which return that they can get against their investment. And because this is normal, I must say that you have no money for free, including, by the way, from the private investors. Everybody wants to know what will be the return on investments, and we have to show what could be the return on investment. But as I said at the beginning, and what Mike was saying on exploration, it's a little bit more difficult because the return is something that which is very difficult to measure in concrete terms, and especially in the short term. But there will be a return. There will be a lot of return from exploration. So now, yes, Europe has the capabilities, industrial capabilities. Europe has the talents, and Europe has the wealth to have a stronger role in space. I think that it will come. It will come, but it will come slowly. But on the other hand, I would like to finish with that. I would not like to have too much money quickly, because all what we are doing is based on industrial capabilities and technology knowledge, and you don't build these industrial capabilities and this new knowledge in one day. So I am not asking for doubling the budget in one day. That this is for sure.
Thank you very much. Second question here, which I think is to all the panellists, and is from George Haskell. In addition to partnerships between government and agencies and industry, is there a role for other kinds of organisations, non-government organisations, volunteer organisations, charities, citizens groups? How could we form partnerships with the wider community? Do you see that being possible? Who wants to answer that? Mike Griffin, do you want to?
Not particularly.
Okay. Mike Healy, let's come down this end of the...
There are, we are working, I mean, if you, some of the Earth observation data that we have and we sell through Infoterra, I mean, it is for disaster relief areas, so we do work with some of the NGOs in those environments providing data to them, but that's usually, again, generously sponsored by the space agencies or the European Commission or whatever. So we've yet to find anybody that's actually going to come up with any money there, but they always want the service. I think it's a little bit difficult to see how that would be a natural extension to charities in the street. But I said it's happening. It's beginning to happen where I think those institutes or those non-government organisations can see that there's benefit for them. They just, generally speaking, haven't got the money to take advantage of the benefit, and they look to somebody else to fund it.
Okay, well, one maybe third and final question, which is from Ian Gibson at BNSC. What are the relative benefits of mandatory and optional programmes in establishing long-term relationships with industry? As you may know, in the UK, we contribute to a number of mandatory programmes in ESA, but we're also very selective in the optional programmes that we support. Mike, do you want to comment on that? Can you?
From an industry perspective, it's very easy. I mean, I talked before about continuity of funding, and that comes through mandatory programmes much more than when there's a voluntary subscription. And I agree with Jean-Jacques. You don't build capabilities overnight; they develop over a long period. And you know, the whole debate about going back to the moon is a rather bizarre debate, given where we were 40 years ago, and that's just because there wasn't continuity of ambition and funding. So even on a smaller scale with the UK, you have to build, or whichever government is increasing funding, you have to build that capability.
Yeah, Jean-Jacques, do you want to, and Mike, do you want to both comment, please?
I think that at ESA we have again the experience of mandatory programs and optional programs, and as I said at the beginning, we need flexibility. I think the mandatory programs are important in the ESA system, and this provides the continuity. But on the other hand, the mandatory programs requires unanimity of all member states, and it's not always easy to find a unanimity of 18 member states, while the optional programs, if 2 member states are ready to do something without the other ones, they can start a program. So I think that the flexibility is very important. So I think that the combination of mandatory and optional provide a good combination between continuity and flexibility. But the continuity is very important. I think that it takes 10 years to build a real industrial capability and 6 months to destroy it. And so the continuity is very, very important.
Strong theme coming out of continuity. Michael, do you want to...
Yeah, I'll make a comment. The point about mandatory versus optional programs is really, in my view, a poor choice of wording. I think Jean-Jacques has got it right. It comes down to a question of continuity of decision-making. We don't get anything out of any major space program. We don't even get the basic product out for several years, at least 5 years, for anything, unless it is a crash program. And the return on investment may be much longer. Political cycles in a democracy are fortunately shorter, but it creates a problem of sustaining what is viewed as mandatory by one political administration into another. So when we talk about mandatory programs, what we're really looking for is continuity in order to obtain the return. Now, when we talk about return, there's been a consistent theme here that for many of our activities in space, return is not measurable. But even where it is measurable, there is the problem of timescales. The least study of return on investments and compound interest equations will show that any return from any investment, which is much beyond 8 or 9 years, is really of no value. $1 today invested that doesn't return anything to me for 8 or 9 or 10 years is not in the equation. So if we listen only to the accountants, we will never make any investment in space or otherwise, which returns its investment more than a few years hence. But if we step back from that thinking, I think we as human beings all know that there are many things we do that we believe to be of value which don't return an investment within the next few years. So we cannot do, and as in democracies, we cannot allow our governments to do only those things which are guaranteed to provide a return within the accounting time frame, or we will become very short-sighted societies indeed.
Mike, I think that's an excellent note to end on. Thank you very much indeed. I have to bring this session to an end. I have two announcements to make in a moment, but first, could I ask you please to thank the panel for their great contributions. Thank you very much from me as moderator. I appreciate your openness. I think we've had a very interesting discussion. Two announcements. First of all, I've been asked to say if you go to the Virgin stand at 10:30, there will be a press session. And secondly, Energia have kindly provided a welcome to the Congress, I think, video, which is going to run as we close down the session. So with that, thank you all, and see you back here later in the day.
As the crew of Expedition 17 on the International Space Station, we would like to welcome the scientists, engineers, and the heads of space industries from different countries participant in the 59th International Astronautic Congress.
This year we celebrate the 10th anniversary of the International Space Station. The ISS is the greatest, most successful international space project of all time, and the participants of the 59th International Astronautical Congress in Glasgow have been directly involved. At this time, the modules of all the international partners are fully integrated, and the ISS program is constantly expanding.
Next year, we will begin operation with 6 crew members on board. New models, new vehicles, and new crews will be arriving to the station. In the future, we envision new industrialization programs up to the year 2020 and perhaps beyond. The ISS will be the international scientific testbed to verify technologies and procedures for missions to the Moon and Mars. International cooperation and integration of the best ideas will arm us with means to implement even more ambitious programs. Humanity cannot stop advancing in the area of space exploration. Let's follow the path together. Expedition 17, Commander Volko Sergei, Flight Engineer Oleg Kononenko,
Flight Engineer Greg Shamatov.
As the crew of Expedition 17 on the International Space Station, we would like to welcome the scientists, engineers, and the heads of space industries from different countries participant in the 59th International Astronautic Congress.
This year we celebrate the 10th anniversary of the International Space Station. The ISS is the greatest, most successful international space project of all time, and the participants of the 59th International Astronautical Congress in Glasgow have been directly involved. At this time, the modules of all the international partners are fully integrated, and the ISS program is constantly expanding.
Next year, we will begin operation with 6 crew members on board. New models, new vehicles, and new crews will be arriving to the station. In the future, we envision new industrialization programs up to the year 2020 and perhaps beyond. The ISS will be the international scientific testbed to verify technologies and procedures for missions to the Moon and Mars. International cooperation and integration of the best ideas will arm us with means to implement even more ambitious programs. Humanity cannot stop advancing in the area of space exploration. Let's follow the path together. Expedition 17, Commander Volko Sergei, Flight Engineer Oleg Kononenko,
Flight Engineer Greg Shamatov.